Alright, Karina baby, a year full of stories. Today is the 27th of April. So let's see what today's story is. Be brave, Potter Pig. One day, Potter Pig was trying out his new bicycle. Say, Mama got you a balance bicycle and a couple of other bicycles, huh? But was trying out his new bicycle. He rode around the yard faster and faster until, "Help!" cried Potter. "I can't stop." He bumped into a wall, fell off, and cut his knee. Mrs. Pig picked him up and gave him a hug. "Let's go and put a band-aid on your poor knee," she said. Later, Potter showed his wounded knee to his friends. "I had to have a really big band-aid," he told them. Soon Potter's knee was better. "Time to take that old band-aid off," said Mrs. Pig. Potter looked worried. The band-aid was stuck tight to the little hairs on the pig's legs. "I'll do it," he said, but he didn't. "Come along," said Mrs. Pig. "I'll pull it off for you." "No," said Potter. "1 on 3, said Mrs. Pig, stooping down. "1, don't touch it," said Potter. "Be brave," said Mrs. Pig. 2, please, said Potter. "I'll give you a cookie," promised his mom. 3, and she pulled the bandage off. "There," said Mrs. Pig, "all done." Potter looked at his knee. "I was brave, wasn't I?" said Potter. "Yes," said his mama, opening the cookie jar. "You were." He was so brave. He got his knee scraped and got a band-aid, and his mama took the band-aid off for him. He did a good job. Let's do this one. Rats on the roof. Rats on the roof. And other stories. Look at the rats dancing. Rats on the roof. Otis and Sophie Dog had just tucked themselves in for the night when the sound of little dancing feet and shrill musical instruments reached their sleepy ears. "Oh no," cried Otis. "We've got rats on the roof." "It looks like we're in for it," Sophie said, pulling up the comforter and sticking her head under the pillow. Otis' dog did the same. "I'd think of something in the morning," he said. "This will call for some drastic measures." It was a long and sleepless night. Look at them up on the roof. They're dancing and they're singing and they're having fun, and the 2 dogs are looking up at them. The racket on the roof had not let up, and in the morning the dogs were tired. They discussed the situation over breakfast. "We shall simply have to get a cat," said Otis. Sophie sat down her coffee cup. "Oh my," she said, "has it come to that? You know how difficult cats can be." "There's nothing else to be done," said her husband. "I'll place an advertisement in the newspaper today." "I hope you know what you're doing," said Sophie. 3 mornings later, the dogs were more tired than ever. The nightly commotion has gotten worse, and no one has responded to the newspaper ad. Otis' dog, his paws shaking from lack of sleep, could barely get his toast to his mouth. "We may have to move," he said. The doorbell rang, and the dogs jumped up from the breakfast table. "Hurry, hurry!" cried Sophie, rushing to the entrance hall. They threw open the front door. A large orange tomcat stood before them. You advised for a cat? He asked. Indeed we did, said Otis Dog. We really need a cat. Oh. Everybody does, said the tomcat nonchalantly, stepping over the threshold. Cats simply make a home. When can you begin? Asked Sophie. Let's not be premature, said the tomcat. There are a few questions to be answered. First of all, where would I sleep? Cats do a lot of that, you know. Well, said Sophie, quite quickly, improvising, we could put some rugs in the hall closet and perhaps behind the stove. You are amazing, said the tomcat, strolling through the living room and looking about. This sofa will do nicely. I am fond of crushed velvet, and that big overstuffed armchair looks comfy, although we've had to do something about that ghostly color. My favorite armchair, muttered Otis under his breath. And then there is a matter of my meals, continued the tomcat casually, running his paw along the piano to inspect for dust. I require 3 square meals a day, plus snacks, in the late afternoon. I like a variety menu, and I insist on fixed hours. I tend to get irritable when I'm made to wait. Oh my. Now see here, said Sophie. The tomcat looked surprised. You don't say you need a cat, didn't you? Yes, oh yes, said Otis, giving his wife a look. I'm sure we'll have no trouble meeting your requirements. Sophie Dog bit her lip. And finally there was a little matter of my salary, said the tomcat. Salary, said the dogs. Of course, said the tomcat. All cats receive a salary. Don't you know that? Mine is $10 a week. I usually receive more, but because this is such a pleasant home, I'm giving you a reduced rate. The dogs looked at each other. $10 a week is a considerable sum, said Otis. I'd like to discuss this with my wife, if you don't mind. By all means, said the tomcat, who looked as if he didn't care one way or the other. You don't want to make any hasty decisions. The dog stepped onto the sun porch. Really? Said Sophie. Of all the nerve. I tell you it's the only way, said Otis. But he disposed of our little problem. He could go. Sophie was skeptical. But $10 a week. It will be worth it for a good night's sleep, said her husband. I'll take full responsibility. Someone always has to take full responsibility, right? So see how they acted in front of the tomcat? They're like, oh yeah, yeah. And then he's like, let me go and talk to my wife. And now they're discussing it in private. So Sophie let her husband have his way, and they stepped back into the living room. You're hired, said Otis Dog. Splendid, said the tomcat. I'll send for my things. We should discuss your duties, said Sophie, getting out to the point. The tomcat seemed not to understand. Duties? He said. You mean a cat's duties to add grace and elegance to the surroundings. Have no fear of that. That's not what I had in mind. Then you must be thinking of our educational value, said the tomcat. I'm told that cat watching can be highly instructive. Yes, yes, said Sophie. That's all very nice. But actually I was referring to the little problem we have with some rats. Come again? Said the tomcat. We have rats on our roof, said Sophie Dog. They are extremely noisy, and they've been keeping us up night after night. You did say rats, cried the tomcat. Rats. I can't stand it. And he went quite off his head, tearing from room to room, climbing the walls, knocking over the furniture, banging on the piano, and went from window to window, shaking his head out and screaming at the top of his voice. "They've got rats in here! Somebody do something! Call 911! Ooh, ugh! How disgusting! I can't stand their little beady eyes, their nasty, shiny tails, their dirty little nails." Without even saying goodbye, the deranged tomcat crushed through the screen door, tore across the front lawn, and disappeared down the street. "I'm glad so many of our neighbors are out of town," said Otis Dog. See? He's okay, the neighbors are out of town. Look at the tomcat run. "I told you cats can be difficult," said his wife. That night the dogs were surprised to find a half-written note on their bedside table. The note reads as follows: "To whom it may concern, owing to an excessively noisy disruption of our daytime sleep schedule, we find ourselves no longer able to remain in residence. We are leaving. Signed, the Rats on the Roof." "Well, I'll be," said Sophie Dog. "Fancy that," said their husband, and they climbed into bed, pulled up the comforter, and went right to sleep. They would sleep until noon. The cat did help. The cat made such a disruption during the day that the rats are like, "Nope, we gotta go." Danger lurks, beware of wolves. Look at the sheep. Their little top hats. A sheepish tale. One afternoon, two sheep decided to be wild and daring, to go for an unsupervised walk. "We can take care of ourselves," said Fred. "Of course we can," said Monty. For long they found themselves at the edge of the forest. "I wonder what that sign says," says Fred. "I can't read." I can read," said Monty. "I read all the time." His friend looked at him. "You can read? You? Prove it." "What does it say?" Monty squinted at the sign. It says, "Danger lurks, beware of the wolves." "Well," he said, "for your information it says, 'Welcome to the pretty green forest.'" Fred was impressed. "You can read," he said. The two of them entered the forest. So what did the sign actually say? What's the reality of that? It says, "Danger lurks, beware of the wolves." What did he think it said? He thought it said, "For your information it says, 'Welcome to the pretty green forest.'" See his perception on what he thinks it says? Perception and reality, baby, are two different things. But Fred was impressed. "You can read," he said. And the two of them entered the forest. Within no time they were in the deepest, dampest part. "Isn't this fun?" said Monty. "It's wild," exclaiming Fred. "But look, there's another sign. What does it say?" Monty squinted. "It says, 'Help prevent forest fires.'" Help prevent forest fires. What does it actually say, baby? It says, "Watch out for wolves." That's what it actually says. "Very sensible," said Fred, and they continued on. So Fred believed what Monty was saying, huh? When they came to a fork in the path and two small signs, Fred said, "Well, this sign says this way, and that sign says that way," says Monty. What does it actually say, though? It says exit, so there's an exit to the forest, and then there's an entrance to the wolf's den. Which way do you think they're going to go? He says, "You're so smart," says Fred, and they went that way. Oh no, he said, "This sign says this way, and this sign says that way. I think they're headed towards the wolf den." What do you think, baby? Oh no. Soon they arrived at a little house. "I wonder if anyone lives in there," said Fred. Inside the house, which is run down and unkempt, a wolf was thinking about food. See what the door says? It says D. Wolf. D. Wolf. I wonder what his name is. Inside the house, which was run down and unkempt, a wolf was thinking about food. "I've eaten just about everything in the forest, and now there's nothing left," he said. "I've been cruelly punished." Look at that wolf. He has little bones sitting outside his house. He thinks that he's been punished because now he has no more food. Suddenly he smelled something delightful and rushed to the window. He could scarcely believe his eyes. "What's this?" he cried. I must be dreaming." "Yoo-hoo!" called out the two sheep. "Anybody home?" "I'm coming," the wolf called back. "I just have to throw on some clothes." And with his heart racing, he rummaged about for something to disguise himself. "If they see me, they'll hightail it away, and I am not nearly so fast as I used to be." At the back of the cupboard he found a musty old sheepskin. "Excellent," he said. "I'll pounce as soon as they are in the door." But an unpleasant thought occurred to him. What if, while he was pouncing on... What do you think he's thinking? What if he pounces on one sheep, the other managed to escape? That would be too awful. And then a clever solution came to him. If both sheep were sleeping, he'd have as much easier time of it. Yes, that was it. It would require a bit of waiting and self-discipline, but it would be well worth it. Outside, the sheep were getting restless. "Shh," said Fred. "I hear someone coming. Maybe we'll get ourselves invited to dinner." The door opened. Standing before them was a large sheep, not unlike themselves. "Welcome, my friends," said the large sheep, "and come on in." The two sheep stepped over the threshold. The wolf got right to the point. "You will, of course, stay the night," he said. "Everything is coming, and there are wolves just everywhere." "Oh, evening is coming, and there are wolves just everywhere." "Wolves!" cried the two sheep. "Yes," said the host, nodding his head sadly. "But you will be safe here. In the morning you can slip away." "Wolves, I believe, are late sleepers." The sheep were most grateful and said, "So lucky for us to run into you," said Monty. "Lucky indeed," said the wolf. While waiting for night to fall, the wolf served the sheep some weak tea and salt down to the table, and tried to appear interested in what the sheep had to say. "Did you hear what happened to the old Farmer Jones?" said Fred. He tapped over the bossy bucket. "He didn't," said Monty. "He did." My," said the wolf. "Farmer Smith has a new tractor," said Monty. "How many cylinders?" said Fred. "2," said Monty, "not 4. The wolf drummed his paws on the table. "Don't drink too much tea. It could keep you awake," he said. "And did you hear about Farmer Johnson's dog?" said Fred. "She had puppies." "She didn't?" said Monty. "She did." Finally, the poor wolf couldn't stand it any longer. His eyelids were getting heavy. A catnip would restore his energy. In a minute he was snoring away. "Then Farmer Jones' chickens all caught the chicken pox," said Fred was saying, but he didn't finish. The host's snoring became quite washes, and he began to twitch in his sleep. His mouth opened in a tremendous great yawn, and the sheepskin fell to the floor. "A wolf," whispered the sheep, and tiptoed out of the house. They hit the front path running, and did not stop until they were clear out of the forest. When the wolf awoke several hours later, he looked around, and he saw that he was entirely alone. "It must have been a dream after all," he said. "Too good to be true." The Mouse Who Got Married. Look at him getting ready. Early in the morning in May, a mouse sprang out of bed, dancing into the bathroom, and stepped under an ice-cold shower. "Tra-la," he sang, soaping up his whiskers. "Today is my wedding day." In another part of town, a large tomcat was reading the morning paper and filing his claws, rather bored with the news of the day, turning to the wedding page, just as if any of his friends were taking the plunge. One particular item arrested his attention. Mr. and Mrs. Grover T. Mousewood of 93 Cheddar Lane announced the engagement of their daughter Mary Lewis to Mr. Cedric Mousejoy of 35 Station Street. The nuptials will be taking place this afternoon at St. Michael's. A reception will follow in the parish hall. Now this is news, said the tomcat. A whole church full of mice. Mice, I do believe, have large families. For the rest of the morning, the tomcat could only think of one thing, and it wasn't at all pretty. I must go into the church, he said. I must. But then he had another idea. No, he said, scratching his chin. I think I'll wait for the reception, when everyone is good and stuffed. At 35 Stateland Street, Cedric Mousejoy put the flower on his buttonhole and admired himself in the full-length mirror. I'll be marrying the most splendid mouse in the world, he sang at the top of his lungs. Even if she's on the table side, we'll make a fine couple. Oh, even if she's on the tall side, we'll make a fine couple. He stood on tiptoes and gave himself an extra height. Little things like that don't matter when you're in love, he said. The doorbell rang, and Cedric opened the door to find his best man, Bob, trembling on the steps. I'm so nervous, said Bob. What if something should go wrong? What could possibly go wrong, said Cedric. The tomcat, now quite famished, adjusted his cravat and admired himself in the mirror. Excellent, he said, excellent. I can't believe my eyes, said his old mother from the next room. Does this mean you are actually going to church? In a manner of speaking, said the tomcat. And he divulged his plans for his big Sunday dinner. Of course, he said, I'll be bringing you a nice meal, a nice big piece of cake. You are dense, snapped his mother. I see you haven't learned anything. Those mice will see you coming a mile away. You'll never get inside. The tomcat suddenly felt defeated. He saw that once again his old mother was right, and he sat down on the sofa and sobbed. But I have my heart set on it, he cried. There, there, said his mother. All is not lost. I'll think of something. It was a beautiful ceremony. The altar of St. Michael's was banked with lilacs and the scent was heavenly. The mother bride dabbed her eyes with a hanky and sighed. The best man did not forget the ring, and the happy couple said I do's loud and clear. A reception followed in the parish hall. That's odd, said Grover T. Mousewood, the father of the bride. I don't remember ordering a cake so big. How much does that thing cost? Oh, hush, said his wife. Don't be such an old tightwad. It's Mary Louise's wedding. Be happy. Oh, I am, said her husband. After a suspicious meal of imported cheese casseroles, it was time for the bride and groom to cut the cake. Are you ready? Said Cedric to the photographer. Ready when you are, called the photographer. Cut the cake. Suddenly, out of the cake, before the astonished eyes of the wedding party, leapt a tomcat. Little bites of frosting stuck to the ears and the tail, and there was a terrible look in his yellow eyes. I've got you now, he cried, looking around for his first course. Oh, the cat got into the cake. The frightened guests all backed up against the wall. Several of them fainted straight away. "We're done for," said the best man, Bob. "Now, just a little minute," someone said. The tomcat spun around and found himself facing the largest mouse he'd ever seen in his life. "Nobody is going to spoil my wedding day," shouted Mary Louise. "Nobody." And without further ado, she picked the tomcat up and by the scruff of his neck and tossed him through the front door into the street, where he landed with an awful thud. "And take this with you," cried Mary Louise, hurling the giant cake after him. Oh, look at how big she is. She's so tall. She's taller than the cat. The next morning, at breakfast, the tomcat came across a very interesting announcement in the newspaper. Miss Mary Louise Mousewood and Mr. Cedric Mousejoy were married yesterday in a solemn ceremony at St. Michael's. The reception followed at the parish hall. The couple is now honeymooning in Boston. "Rats," said the tomcat. "That is no mention of me whatsoever." "Just as well," said the mother. "Have another piece of cake, and we have plenty." Meanwhile, the terrace of their house in Boston, Mr. and Mrs. Cedric Mousejoy were discussing their wedding day in details. "Too bad that dreadful cat had to crash the party," said Cedric. "Don't worry, dear," said the wife. "Life is full of unpleasant little surprises, but together we'll manage to rise above them." And Cedric Mousejoy knew that he had indeed married the most splendid mouse in the world. That's right, baby. They're a team. They're going to work on it together. There's lots of things that happen in this world that just aren't right, but if you have a good teammate, you do good. Eat your vegetables. Look at the dinosaur. He's eating his vegetables. An owl who had decided to spend the morning in bed was fluffing up her pillows with what she had heard the most awful noise outside. It was the sound of munching, and it was coming closer. "Termites!" cried the owl. "They must be gigantic." But when she stepped out of her front door, she saw what was up, and it wasn't termites. A brontosaurus was merrily eating the oak tree in which the oaks made her home. "Delicious," said the brontosaurus. "I really think I prefer oak to elm, although an occasional hickory is a nice alternative." "May I ask you what you think you are doing?" said the owl. "I'm having my breakfast," replied the brontosaurus calmly. "If you don't mind." "I do mind," said the owl. "This is my home." "Go find breakfast someplace else." "I'll do no such thing," said the brontosaurus. "You'll simply have to relocate." And he opened his furious jaws and took another bite. "That's my terrace," shrieked the owl. "I'm warning you." The brontosaurus found this amusing. "Oh, yes?" he said. "Just what do you intend to do about it?" "You'll see," said the owl. And she hurried inside and makes an emergency call to her friends. "Stop everything and get over here at once," she cried. There isn't a second to lose." The brontosaurus didn't give the owl another thought and continued with his breakfast. He hummed a little tune as he chewed. Suddenly he heard a sound of flapping wings. Before he knew it, the oak tree was covered with birds, sparrows, and... Look at Mrs. Owl. She's making a telephone call. And larks, hawks, gulls, crows, finches, hummingbirds, buzzards, and cranes. They were perched on every branch and looked defiant. "Out of the way!" roared the brontosaurus. But the owl's friends would not budge. The brontosaurus tried to find an empty branch to nibble on, but everywhere he looked, a bird was stationed. You'll have to eat us along with the leaves and branches, said the owl. Ugh, ugh, cried the brontosaurus. What a disgusting thought. You know I'm a vegetarian. I'm nice and bitter, said one of the crows. I'm on the slimy side myself, said a pigeon. The brontosaurus felt his stomach turning a little queasy. I'm good and salty, said the plump gull. Stop that, roared the brontosaurus. I hope you don't mind a few bones with your buzzard, said the old bird. By now the brontosaurus felt positively nauseated, but although his appetite was ruined, he didn't want to lose face. I believe I hear someone calling me, he said. We'll continue this discussion some other time, and he lumbered away and out of sight. There he goes. Nice work, said the owl and the other birds. Some problems we just can't manage alone, said the buzzard, and it's wonderful to have friends to whom we can call on as a crutch. You said a mouthful, said the owl. Swan song. What does the stop sign say? It says the bus stops here. A cow was waiting at the bus stop, minding her own business, when a frightened swan ran up to her. Help, help, cried the swan. A fox is after me. Oh dear, said the cow. That's not good. Do something, cried the swan. Now calm down, said the cow. I will help you. I will help you, but you must do exactly as I say. A moment later, a panting fox rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. Pardon me, ma'am, he said, bowing low to the cow. Did you by any chance see a swan pass this way? What do you think she's gonna say? Oh, look at this one's the hat. Why do you ask? Said the cow. Said the fox. She's a friend of mine, and I have a present for her. No, replied the cow, I did not see your friend. The fox scratched his chin. Well, thanks all the same, he said. And by the way, that is an exquisite hat you are wearing. Thank you, said the cow. It is new. Ha, 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 sang out the swan. It's not a hat at all. It's me. We fooled you. We fooled you. Ah, cried the fox. Why would the swan do that? Right? The cow hid the swan, and then the swan was like, oh no, it's me. Aha, cried the fox, as he leapt up and tried to snatch the swan from atop the cow's head. Hold on tight, called out the cow, and with that she pulled up her skirt and tore off down the road at the tremendous clip, leaving behind the wicked fox. So, cow runs with the swan. Coughing and wheezing in a cloud of dust, he was absolutely furious. When they had gotten a safe distance away, the cow put the swan down. You did not keep quiet as I instructed, said the cow. Well, my heavens, said the swan, I had to show that fox how smart we are. Sometimes being really smart is knowing when to say nothing, said the cow. But I see that I was all wrong about you. I mistook you for a swan when you are nothing but a silly goose. Baby, sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. Alright? See, the cow did a good thing. The cow tried to protect the swan, but the swan decided, see, there goes the swan. And the cow decided to help the swan. And the swan decided that they were going to talk to the fox instead of just letting it go. Doesn't matter how smart you are or how clever you are, sometimes the best thing to do is just to move on. Right? From a situation, especially when someone's trying to protect you. You have to just move on sometimes. Right? Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. It goes, "Ooh la la, my goodness me," said the young frog, catching sight of his reflection in the shop window. "I have never noticed it before, but I have magnificent legs. Look at that frog. The frog likes his legs." "Vanity, vanity," chirped a sparrow. "Well, I do," said the frog. And feeling quite pleased with himself, he hopped down the street in the middle of the next block and paused to buy a newspaper from the rabbit friend. "Look at these," said the frogs. "Aren't they just about the most gorgeous legs you've ever seen?" Said the rabbit, who was sure he misunderstood. So the rabbit didn't understand what the frog was saying because he didn't see it. "I know you don't think so," said the frog, and he took his newspaper and disappeared around the corner. Soon he saw a possum friend busily hanging out her laundry, tiptoed up behind her and a wet blanket, and the frog exhibited first out a leg and then the other. "What do you think of these?" he said to the possum. "Aren't they just the most stunning legs you've ever laid your eyes on?" "They certainly are," said the possum, who was sure the frog was joking. "Now I'm off to sit by the pond," said the frog. "I so enjoy reading my morning paper in peace and quiet." As he hopped on down the road leading out of town, soon he ran into an old Chelly friend. I see you can't help noticing my legs," said the frog. "Beg pardon," said the Chloe. Chloe, Collie, Chloe. "My legs," said the frog. "Aren't they the most wonderful legs you've ever seen in your entire life?" Quite," said the Chloe, who thought for sure the frog had gone completely insane. "Very fine legs indeed," said, "so green and slimy." "And now I'm off to sit at the pond and read my newspaper," said the frog. "Ta-ta," to the rabbit inspecting the frog's legs. "Ta-ta," said the Chloe, shaking his head sadly as the frog hopped away. At the pond, the young frog found a large, sunny boulder, stretched out upon it, and opened his morning paper for a nice long read. As the news of the day was unusually dull, he turned to the home section. After skimming various articles, he finally came to one that seemed of interest. It was titled Magnificent Frog Legs by Madame Cecily. "Must be some beautiful tips," said the frog. "Not that I need any. The French, as everyone knows, are supreme masters when it comes to the preparation of frog legs," wrote Madame Cecile. "By far the most popular recipe is that of sauté the frog legs of lots of butter, garlic, and herbs. Ooh la la." The young frog's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Did he realize that what they were talking about? Think about it, baby. This lady's talking about preparing frog legs. Some people eat frogs, and that's why she's talking about preparing the frog legs. EGATS. Editus? He cried, as he hopped back to town as fast as he could. "Forget what I was saying earlier," he cried out, thinking over talking the Chloe. "My legs are simply covered in green bumps and unsightly blotches. Spread it around." He hurried on. "Poor thing," said the Chloe. "He's gotten worse." "Oh my." "I was only joking about my legs," said the frog to the possum. "No need to repeat what I said." Oh, he got scared. He realized what they were talking about. "Oh, I know you were joking," said the possum. Legs? Did you think I said something about legs? Cried the frog to the rabbit. Ha ha! I said I need to purchase some eggs. Grade A eggs. Forget I said anything at all. I was sure I hadn't heard correctly, said the rabbit. The young frog hurried home to look for a pair of long, unattractive wooden sticks. But before he could enter his little house, he bumped into a French puddle who had recently moved into the neighborhood. Bonjour, said the poodle, tapping his burret. Oh no, screamed the frog, and he ran inside and bolted the door. I'll never be vain again, he cried. Never, never, never. His words resounded from room to room. My goodness me, said the frog. I've never noticed it before, but I have a beautiful voice. Oh my. Oh my. There's the French poodle outside. He got so scared. Mrs. Jones, it says, Merry Christmas. And get the goose. Mrs. Jones had just settled down to a mug of milky tea and a plate of crackers when the telephone rang. I must have known, she complained. Someone's always calls when I'm having treats. Mrs. Jones waddled over to the telephone and picked up the receiver. Hello, she said, somewhat irritable. Well, said her friend Rose, who lived in the building. What are they like, your new neighbors across the hall in 12E? The postman said a couple moved in during the night. I haven't heard a thing, said Mrs. Jones, but my hearing isn't what it used to be. I'm dying to know what they look like, said Rose. Why don't you peek out into the hall and see what you can see? You know how dark that hall is, said Mrs. Jones, and besides my eyesight isn't so good. I can't see my beak in front of my face. Well, as soon as you hear anything at all, give me a call, said Rose, and she hung up. Mrs. Jones nibbled on her crackers and sipped on her milky tea. New neighbors, she said, I do hope we get along. When she had finished her snacks and took the dishes into the kitchen to wash up, moving is such a hard work, she said. I think I'll heat up some vegetable soup and take it over. That will be a friendly gesture. When the soup was ready, Mrs. Jones stepped across the hall. It took her some time to locate the bell. Who is it? Called a deep female voice. It's Mrs. Jones from across the hall, she said Mrs. Jones. I've brought you some vegetable soup. The door of 12E opened, but just a crack. Mrs. Jones could not see the long, furry nose protruding out of her large, sharp white teeth. I thought you might be too tired to cook, said Mrs. Jones. We can't cook yet, said the new neighbor. The gas company hasn't turned on the gas. Otherwise, well then, said Mrs. Jones, holding out the pot of soup. I hope you'll enjoy this. Thanks, said the new neighbor. Mrs. Jones squinted and stepped closer to the open door. I really can't see you very well, she said. This hallway is so dark. My husband and I are canners? Said the new neighbor quickly. Oh, how lovely, said Mrs. Jones. But you don't sound like canners. C-A-N-A-R-I-E-S, canners. We have low voices, said the neighbor. But we are canners, said the deep male voice from behind the door. We are the Carusos, or C-A-R-U-S-O-S, Carusos. I'm so pleased to meet you, said Mrs. Jones. When you are all settled in, we must get together for dinner. The Carusos both gasped. By all means, said Mrs. Carusos. We'd like nothing better. I'll be off now, said Mrs. Jones. Toddaloo, toddaloo, said the carvers. Mrs. Jones went inside her apartment. Charming couple, she thought. Mrs. Caruso closed the door 12E. If only that stove had been working, she said. Oh no. Look at, do you know what it might be? Look at the snout coming out. I think it's a wolf. That evening, Mrs. Jones consulted her calendar. My stars, she said, Christmas is only 2 days away. I really must start planning my big Christmas dinner. But then she remembered that the Christmas her friend Rose would be out of town visiting her family. It will be a lonely Christmas indeed, said Mrs. Jones, but I'll make the best of it. The doorbell rang. Who is it? Called Mrs. Jones, who never opened the door without knowing who it was on the other side. It is Mrs. Caruso, said the new neighbor. Oh, Mrs. Jones threw open the door. Do come in, she said. I only have a minute, said Mrs. Caruso, remaining in the dark hall. My husband and I were hoping you'd join us for Christmas dinner. It would give us such pleasure. Mrs. Jones was thrilled. I should be delighted, she explained. May I bring anything? Just yourself, Mrs. Caruso, and she hurried back into her own apartment. What a lovely surprise, said Mrs. Jones, closing and bolting her door. The next morning the telephone rang. Well, said Rose, have you met them yet? Oh, yes, said Mrs. Jones, they were delightful. Canaries, you know, and they just invited me for Christmas dinner. Marvelous, said Rose. Now I don't have to worry about you being all alone. No sooner had Mrs. Jones hung up the telephone than it rang again. It was Mrs. Caruso. I hate to bother you, my dear, she said, but do you by any chance have a nice big roasting pan? Ours seems to have gotten lost in the move. Oh, certainly, said Mrs. Jones. Is there anything else you need? As a matter of fact, said Mrs. Caruso, would you know of a good recipe for plum sauce? Oh, I surely do, said Mrs. Jones, and wouldn't you allow me to make it? I'd so love to contribute to the dinner. If you like, Mrs. Caruso. There was a short pause. I do hope I don't run into a wild rice again this year, said Mrs. Caruso. Mrs. Jones insisted on preparing the wild rice as well. I'd be happy to do it, she said. You just concentrate on the main course. Oh, we will, said Mrs. Caruso. Mrs. Jones felt it was impolite to ask what the main course would be. I'm sure it will be tasty. On Christmas Eve, Caruso called again with a slight problem. My gas company still hasn't turned on the stove, she said. I don't know what we're going to do. Mrs. Jones had a solution immediately. But you must use mine, she said. You are kind. What would we do without you, said Mrs. Caruso. Have the oven good and hot around noon. We can have eggnog while we're waiting for dinner, said Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Caruso thought this was an excellent idea, although she confessed that eggnog was really not one of her specialties. On Christmas morning, the Carusos were up bright and early. This is going to be Christmas to remember, said Mrs. Caruso. Yum, 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 said the wife. I hope that there will be plenty of plum sauce. In her own apartment, Mrs. Jones, who was getting up even earlier, was merrily setting the table. I have such pretty china, she said. At noon, on the nose, the Carusos rang the bell, and Mrs. Jones opened the door. Merry Christmas, she said. Merry Christmas, said the Carusos, stepping inside. Is the oven nice and hot? Oh dear, said Mrs. Jones. I know I'd forget something. The Carusos were quite put out, but they tried not to show it. Oh, look at them. No harm done, said Mrs. Crusoe. Turn it on right now. We'll start on the eggnog. Mrs. Jones went into the kitchen and came back shortly. I won't take long to heat up, she said. Good, said the Crusoes. Conversation did not flow easily. Nice day, said Mr. Crusoe. Very nice indeed, said Mrs. Jones. And so lovely to share it with the new neighbors. Yes, said the Crusoes. I think I'll go see about the oven, said Mrs. Crusoe. And she got up and got into the kitchen. Suddenly Mrs. Jones felt a long furry tail brush up against her feet, and Mrs. Crusoe passed. Oh no, thought Mrs. Jones. The Crusoes aren't canaries at all. And right away she saw what was up. Mrs. Jones, dear, Mrs. Crusoe called out from the kitchen, would you step in here for a minute? Miss Jones knew she had to do something fast. Some fast talking or else. I'm sure I can take care of everything, she answered back. You don't need me. Come have another cup of eggnog, said Mrs. Crusoe returned. The oven is ready, she said, giving her husband a significant look. I'm sure it won't be able to eat more than a few bites, said Mrs. Jones. Ever since my operation, I haven't had much of an appetite. Operation, said the Crusoes. Actually, I've had several, said Mrs. Jones. They took out my gizzards. Not the gizzards, said Mrs. Crusoe, who's always been partial to gizzards. And I only have a tiny bit of my liver left, said Mrs. Jones. Hardly anything at all. Oh, that's really too bad, said the Crusoes. Of course, said Mrs. Jones. My doctor said they want to put me to put on weight. I'm just a bag of bones. You look plenty plump to me, said Mrs. Crusoe. Feathers, said Mrs. Jones. Merely feathers, very deceptive. The Crusoes could now see that their big Christmas dinner vanishing before their very eyes. Mrs. Jones began to scratch feverishly. Oh, do excuse me, she said. I know it's rude to do this in company, but I have such a flea problem. You don't say, said the Corners. Mrs. Jones continued. Of course, she said. I'm not implying I don't have absolute faith in the doctors, but I do wish they wouldn't give me all that medication. I'm positively stuffed with milk of magnesia. Now, this is simply too much for the Crusoes, and they hastily made for their excuses. Oh, we hate to run off like this, said Mr. Crusoe, but we forgot that we always visit shut-ins at Christmas time. Mrs. Jones did not insist on their staying. We'll get together in the new year, she said. Of course, said the Crusoes, but that was their real name. If that was their real name, if they hurried off, hoping to find something decent to eat for Christmas. You and your bright ideas, mumbled Mr. Crusoe. Mrs. Jones bolted the door, collapsed on the sofa, and heaved great sighs of relief. Then she placed a call to her landlord, who was shocked to learn that they had wolves in the building. I should remedy this situation immediately, said Mrs. Jones, he said. Miss Jones felt reassured and vowed to open her door to no one until she was advised that the Crusoes had departed for good. That night she sat down to a big plate of plum sauce. I really shouldn't, she said. My doctor says I'm a little overweight, but sometimes I need to reward ourselves, as she ate it all. Oh, baby. So see how she made up a bunch of excuses. So, what happened? Miss Jones went to the neighbor's house, right? And the neighbors were actually wolves. The wolves wanted to eat Miss Jones because she is either a swan or a goose. She's something of that nature. And so they thought that she was going to be a good meal for them, right? So she went to the neighbor's house, and she was like, oh, you guys are wonderful, here's some vegetable soup. And then all of a sudden, she was trapped in her own house with these wolves in her house, right? So what did she have to do? She had to make up a couple excuses of she lost her gizzard, she doesn't have a liver, she's way too thin, and she just has feathers, and she wouldn't be a good meal because she realized that she had wolves in her house, right? And then the wolves had to make up excuses of why they had to leave. Human nature, baby, is to be as nice as possible to everyone as possible, and then when you get trapped, you try and protect your family. Mrs. Jones tried to protect herself, and the wolves tried to go and find something else to eat for dinner. Not everything is always what it seems, but we try to be as nice and as loving to everyone as possible, right? Because that's just what you do, and you always try to protect your family, but don't ever throw yourself under the bus. Just know that I love you, and these books have some really good learning lessons in them, which is why children read them. Alright, just know that Mama loves and adores you. I do. I love you, and I adore you, and I miss you, and I can't wait to see you. And just know that you're loved, and that you're never, ever, ever, ever forgotten about. Ever. That's all you need to know, though, is that Mama loves you. Mama loves you and adores you, and I can't wait to see you, baby.